Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. On the early morning of November 6th, 2012, residents heading to work along 18th Avenue in Quezon City stumbled upon the body of a young woman. She had no shoes or purse, dressed in a white top and blue leggings. No identification was found on her. Her eyes were open, frozen in a look of fear. First responders from the local precinct quickly secured the area and called in a medical examiner. The initial evaluation made it clear this was no accident. The woman had sustained 5 gunshot wounds to the head. Her body showed signs of severe trauma, bruises, scrapes, and dark marks across multiple areas. Particularly extensive injuries around the pelvic region led investigators to suspect an assault with intent. There were no personal items, no phone, no keys, not even an ID. The only thing in her hand was a paper bag from McDonald's. Nearby, detectives also recovered a discarded receipt from the same fast food location. As law enforcement worked to identify her, neighbors began offering their statements. Several individuals reported hearing gunshots around 5 a.m., while others mentioned seeing a dark SUV speeding away from the scene. One witness claimed shots were fired from inside the vehicle at someone already on the ground. 2 others remembered a partial license plate number, a detail that would prove crucial in the early phase of the investigation. Crime scene technicians held off on moving the body to preserve as much evidence as possible. Still, within hours, the area had attracted not just police officers, but also bystanders, journalists, and people filming on their phones. Investigators were left with an avalanche of questions. Who was she? What brought her to this place? And who would commit such an act? With no answers yet, detectives focused on 2 promising leads: the fast food receipt and the eyewitness reports. The night before, on November 5th, 20-year-old Julie Ann Rodelis left her home in Las Piñas. She lived with her family, and her absence wasn't immediately alarming. Julie often stayed late at modeling gigs or with friends. That evening, she told her mother and younger brothers she'd be out late and not to wait up. Julie had plans to reconnect with a close friend, Althea Altamirano. They'd recently had a falling out, but Althea reached out with what seemed like an olive branch, an invite to meet a potential client in the modeling industry. It sounded like a professional opportunity, and Julie was eager to make amends. She dressed carefully, choosing a white top and blue leggings, and put on makeup. Around 6 p.m., she said goodbye to her family and headed to meet Althea at the SM Mall of Asia, a massive shopping center in nearby Pasay. The evening began innocently. Just 2 friends watching a movie, catching up, walking around. Nothing seemed unusual. Afterward, they took a cab to the World Trade Center, where Althea claimed the meeting with the supposed client would take place. As they walked along Diosdado Macapagal Boulevard around 10:30 p.m., near the intersection with Gil Puyat Avenue, a dark SUV suddenly pulled up beside them. 2 men jumped out, grabbed Julie, and forced her into the vehicle. It all happened in a matter of seconds. Althea, who was standing right next to her, didn't resist or intervene. Julie's handbag and shoes were left behind on the pavement. The SUV sped away from the scene almost immediately. In a state of panic, Althea remained at the location, holding Julie's belongings and crying uncontrollably. Her distress caught the attention of passing patrol officers who stopped to check on her. They offered to escort her to the local precinct, where she gave a scattered statement, claiming that Julie had been taken by unknown individuals whose identities she didn't recognize. According to her, the assault came out of nowhere and she barely saw the vehicle, only that it was a large black SUV. She insisted that there had been no attempt to take her as well. At around 12:40 a.m., after giving her statement, Althea texted her boyfriend, asking him to come pick her up. He arrived with his father, and they took her home to Cavite. Althea did not seek medical attention, nor did she return to the police station. By the following day, she had stopped answering calls from law enforcement. Once Julie's disappearance was confirmed, her family began searching for her. By that time, Althea was already avoiding contact with investigators. Later, her relatives claimed that she was afraid for her safety. However, detectives noted several inconsistencies in her story. She failed to mention the prearranged meeting with Julie or the plan for a supposed professional introduction. She also left out the name of her boyfriend, the owner of the vehicle used in the abduction. In the early stages of the investigation, Althea's version of events gave no indication of a possible motive behind the attack. It would take further developments to begin unraveling what truly happened that night. Julie Ann Rodelas was born on July 14, 1992, and raised in Las Piñas, a southern suburb of Metro Manila, in a modest but close-knit household. She was one of 6 siblings. Her mother, Luz, supported the family by preparing and selling homemade meals. There was no father figure involved in their lives. His whereabouts and identity remained unknown, and he played no role in the family's day-to-day existence. Despite the financial hardships, Julie grew up surrounded by love and support. From a young age, she was focused and responsible. Her decision to study hotel and restaurant management at Arellano University, a private college, was deliberate and driven by her long-term goals. But tuition costs were high, forcing her to put her education on hold several times. To help fund her studies, Julie began working part-time. Modeling wasn't a pursuit of fame. It was a practical solution to cover her expenses. Her entry into the industry came through a personal connection, which eventually led to commercial shoots and an appearance on the ABS-CBN network. Julie's modeling career began gaining traction. She was featured in photo shoots for well-known men's magazines, including FHM Philippines. Her appearance, work ethic, and professionalism helped her secure steady gigs. Balancing her studies and modeling, she carved a path forward in a highly competitive field. A significant influence in Julie's modeling career was Althea Altamirano, a friend 3 years her senior. Originally from Cavite, Althea had also entered the modeling world and, by 2012, had gained a modest level of recognition. Her name appeared in the September issue of FHM that year, where she was featured as a Girlfriend of the Month. In her social circles, Althea was viewed as ambitious, energetic, and goal-oriented. But behind the image of success were personal details she kept carefully hidden. Althea was the mother of 2. She chose not to publicize this, knowing it could undermine the impression of her as a young and unattached professional model. Althea and Julie had known each other for years, and their relationship appeared close from the outside. Julie trusted her deeply. However, things shifted when Julie began gaining more traction in the industry. As her popularity grew, so did the tension between them. In Althea's eyes, Julie had gone from a friend to a rival. At the same time, rumors began spreading among other models that Althea was raising 2 children. She suspected that Julie was the one who shared that information, and she saw it as a betrayal. That moment marked a turning point in their relationship. What started as quiet jealousy gradually turned into resentment and eventually into conflict. Though the tension remained unspoken, it hung heavily between them. Althea's growing fear of losing her standing in the industry pushed her toward confiding in her boyfriend, Jaro. Jaro was 32 years old and owned a tattoo shop in Quezon City. He had no direct ties to the modeling world, but he was known for his aggressive behavior. According to Althea, during one of their arguments, he once pointed a weapon at her. She felt threatened, but didn't walk away from the relationship. It was Jaro who came up with the idea to scare Julie, suggesting it would help her understand who she was dealing with. The plan was to stage a confrontation without letting things go too far. Althea didn't push back on the suggestion. She didn't have a concrete plan, nor did she seem to grasp how serious the situation could become. But her actions in the following hours would prove to be decisive. She chose the moment, shared Julie's location, led her to the designated spot, and stood by silently when the incident occurred. None of these actions were impulsive. Immediately after Julie Ann Rodelas was taken, she was transported to a residential neighborhood in Quezon City known as Salam Compound, located on Lanao Street. This was a densely populated, enclosed area, home primarily to Muslim families. The location where she was brought was a private house, temporarily being used as a hideout. Inside were several men connected to Jaro, none of whom made any effort to hide their involvement. The entire operation had been premeditated, with each person assigned a role. According to court records, the first person to isolate Julie Ann was a man named Efren. He took her into a separate room. Soon after, others in the house heard her yelling and pleading for help. One of the men present, Jamar, later testified that he heard her cries but chose not to intervene. That's when the aggression escalated physically. Witnesses stated that Efren was the initial aggressor and stayed alone with her for an extended period. Evidence later confirmed that she was subjected to both physical assault and an act of aggressive harassment. Later that night, a man named Aldos arrived at the house, someone other participants described as dangerous and unpredictable. He wasn't part of the original plan, nor had his presence been agreed upon by the others. At the time, the house was occupied by Jamar, Bob, Abdili, and several others. Aldos came armed with a .45 caliber handgun. He quickly assessed the situation, dismissed objections, and stated he intended to use the girl before she was taken care of. No one present tried to stop him. Aldos's arrival dramatically escalated the situation. Unlike the others, he didn't treat it as a scare tactic or staged intimidation. His actions made it clear he never intended to let the young woman leave the house alive. When Jaro returned from a quick trip to McDonald's, the others told him that Aldos and Efren had already assaulted Julie Ann. She was in a state of shock, barely responsive, and unable to speak coherently. After assessing the situation, Jaro made a decision. Witnesses later testified that he said, "She needs to be dealt with." When he stepped outside the house, Aldos approached Julie and told her she was going to be taken home. Grateful and hopeful, she thanked him, unaware that it was a lie. By that point, the group was already discussing where they would dispose of her body. Sensing things were spiraling far beyond what had been agreed upon, Jamar left the house. He would later become a key witness in the investigation. The remaining individuals carried out the final steps of the plan. Investigators later confirmed that Aldos fired the first shot at Julie Ann, followed by Efren. The firearm had been brought in advance, part of a plan that had clearly gone much further than intended. While Julie Ann Rodelas was still being held captive in the house on Lanao Street in Quezon City, Jaro left briefly to go to a McDonald's located along United Nations Avenue in Manila. At 2:03 a.m., he placed an order for 2 cheeseburger combo meals to go. After returning to the house, he handed one of the meals to Julie Ann. Despite her weakened condition, she responded. According to a witness, she softly said she would eat the burger later once she got home. The tension inside the house grew even worse when one of the men accidentally said Jaro's real name, Fernando, while inside the vehicle. Julie may have heard it, and even in her condition, there was a risk she could remember it. Jaro feared that if she survived and recognized him by voice, she could become a serious problem. In the early morning hours, around 5 a.m., Julie Ann's body was placed into a Mitsubishi Montero and driven away from Lanao Street. The vehicle made a brief stop at 121 18th Avenue in Quezon City. There, the door opened, and her body was pulled out and left in a roadside ditch. Her identity was confirmed later that same day. Concerned that Julie hadn't returned home after her evening plans with a friend, her family had already started looking for her. When the news reported that a young woman's body had been found in a ditch that morning, her mother, Luce, and one of her brothers went to the morgue. The clothes matched what Julie had been wearing when she left the house. Final confirmation came from her mother. The victim was indeed her daughter. For the family, it was a devastating moment. Julie had never gone missing before. She always stayed in contact, even when spending the night elsewhere. This time, there had been complete silence. Her loved ones tried reaching out to Althea, but she wasn't answering. It was at this point that police began to piece together the connection between the victim, Althea, and Jaro. The day after Julie Ann Rodelas's body was discovered, investigators from the CIDU, Criminal Investigation and Detection Unit, began working through key evidence. One of their first moves was to analyze the McDonald's receipt found in the victim's hand. Using the timestamp on the receipt, police requested surveillance footage from the McDonald's on United Nations Avenue. The video clearly showed a man of average height with visible tattoos placing a takeout order around 2 a.m. His face was clearly identifiable. At the same time, authorities were verifying details about the vehicle seen fleeing the scene. Witnesses had reported a black SUV, believed to be a Mitsubishi Montero. 2 individuals even remembered part of the license plate. From this information, investigators traced the vehicle to a woman named Rosalina Quiambao. A background check revealed that her son, Fernando Quiambao Jr., known by the nickname Haro, was the regular user of the vehicle. This discovery placed Jaro squarely at the center of the investigation. On November 9th, officers began surveillance of the Quiambao family home. Although Jaro wasn't seen the next day, around 6 p.m., law enforcement observed his father, Fernando Quiambao Sr., leaving the residence. He was driving a black Toyota Innova and carrying a change of clothes. The vehicle headed northwest. Officers followed discreetly. About an hour later, the vehicle stopped in a remote part of Pampanga province, in a village called Apalit. Fernando Sr. entered a traditional Filipino hut known as a bahay kubo. Parked nearby was the Mitsubishi Montero, registered to Jaro's mother. Police moved in and entered the property. Inside, they found Jaro and Althea. Neither of them resisted. No weapons were found during the arrest, but the fact that they were actively being sought, combined with the vehicle match, surveillance footage, and their known connection to the victim, gave authorities enough reason to place them in custody. A forensic team was called to the scene, and the suspects were transported to the station for questioning. Meanwhile, CIDU launched a coordinated operation targeting the Salam Compound neighborhood, a predominantly Muslim area where Julie Ann had previously been held. Around midnight on November 11th, police units entered the residence used as a temporary holding spot. Armed individuals were present, and gunfire erupted. One suspect, Fahad Osman, known by the nickname Bob, was fatally shot. Others were taken into custody: Jamar Waraji and Jalan Pasawilan. Both were charged with illegal possession of firearms and brought in for further interrogation. At first, all suspects denied involvement in the crime, but as questioning progressed and pressure increased, their stories began to shift. Jamar admitted to being present in the house where Julie Ann had been held and began cooperating with investigators. He explained that he had agreed to help Jaro out of loyalty, saying Jaro often provided him and others with alcohol and financial help. Jamar identified other individuals involved, including Efren Talib and someone known only as Aldos. According to Jamar, Aldos had acted on his own and was the one who escalated the situation far beyond what anyone expected. Althea, interviewed separately, gave her version of the events. She admitted to agreeing to lure Julie to the location, but claimed she had no idea that things would go as far as they did. In her words, she believed it was only meant to scare her. Jaro, for his part, remained silent during questioning and demanded that his arrest be ruled invalid, insisting there was no evidence directly linking him to the crime. The investigation eventually confirmed that 8 individuals were involved in the crime: Jaro, Althea, Jamar, Jelan, Efren, Aldos, Bob, who was later fatally shot, and Abdili. It became clear that the events weren't the result of a personal dispute or emotional outburst. They were part of a coordinated and premeditated plan, one that ended in a tragic loss of life. As details emerged, the case gained wide attention in the media, and the investigation moved into high gear. Following her arrest, Althea Altamirano agreed to speak with detectives, but from the very beginning, she took a defensive stance. During questioning, she attempted to portray herself as someone who had been manipulated and pressured by her boyfriend. According to her, Jaro had previously threatened her, and she felt she had no choice but to go along with his plan. She claimed that after the abduction, she went into shock and didn't know how to respond, which, she said, was why she initially misled the police and concealed the true sequence of events. She insisted she had no knowledge of where Julie was taken or what she was subjected to. But Jamar Waraji told a very different story. His version directly contradicted Althea's claims. He gave investigators a detailed account of how the plan was formed, who was responsible for each part, and how the operation was carried out. According to Jamar, it was Althea who informed Jaro of Julie's whereabouts and even came up with the cover story to lure her into the meeting. He also said she knew the SUV and accompanying individuals were already stationed along Macapagal Avenue, waiting for them. In the eyes of investigators, her actions made it clear she had knowingly played an active role in the abduction. Shortly after several of the suspects were arrested, Aldos and Efren disappeared. Police were unable to apprehend them in time. They were officially declared fugitives and nationwide bulletins were issued. Jamar assisted authorities in creating composite sketches, which were shared with the public. Despite those efforts, both men remained at large, not only in 2012, but for years afterward, effectively evading justice. As the case developed, an unexpected turn came involving one of the detainees, Jelan Pasawilan. In January 2013, he was released on bail. Although he was charged with illegal possession of firearms, investigators were unable to gather strong evidence linking him directly to the fatal assault or any physical aggression. Just a few months after his release, on June 15th, a violent incident occurred at his home in Quezon City. During a family meal, an unknown assailant entered the property and shot Jelan. He died instantly. Neighbors later stated that the shooter was known to local authorities, but no arrest followed. Jelan's wife declined to cooperate with police and signed a waiver officially blocking any investigation into the incident. As a result, the person responsible was never brought to justice. For investigators, Jelan's death meant the loss of a potential witness. Though he had denied any involvement in the events that led to Julie's death, his exact role in planning the abduction was never fully determined. Still, with the family refusing to pursue charges, the case was formally closed. The public response was swift and critical, especially since the attacker's identity had been confirmed. But existing laws prevented police action without a formal complaint from the victim's family. By the summer of 2013, most of the individuals involved in the case were either in custody or officially wanted. Althea continued to claim she bore no responsibility for what happened, denying any connection to Aldos or Efren. However, witness testimony, the sequence of events, and verified facts consistently contradicted her account. As the investigation wrapped up, authorities had a clear understanding of who had made decisions, who had taken part in the action, and who remained at large. Nearly 12 years passed from the time of Julie Ann Rodelis' tragic death to the first sentencing in the case. For a long time, the investigation remained stalled. It wasn't until 2024 that a trial was finally scheduled for the central figures, Fernando Quiambao Jr., known as Jaro, and Althea Altamirano. The initial court date, set for July 12th, was rescheduled 3 times. Although the reasons for the delays weren't officially disclosed, the victim's family believed the repeated postponements only served the interests of the accused. The trial began in September and lasted several months. Court sessions examined witness statements, case files, surveillance footage, and text communications between the involved parties. Notably, the firearm used in the fatal incident was never recovered. 2 of the suspected perpetrators, Efren Talib and Aldos, remained fugitives. At the conclusion of the trial, the court found Jaro guilty of kidnapping, complicity in a violent crime, and involvement in aggressive behavior. Although there was no direct evidence linking him to the act of pulling the trigger, the moment he gave the order to handle Julie after realizing she had recognized him was deemed decisive. The court interpreted this as intent to cause fatal harm. Jaro was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 22 to 40 years. He was also ordered to pay restitution to the victim's family in the amount of 500,000 Philippine pesos, approximately 8,400 euros. The verdict for Althea Altamirano was different. Her actions were classified as participation in a kidnapping. The court concluded that there wasn't sufficient evidence to prove she had prior knowledge of the intent to commit fatal harm or aggression. prosecutors failed to provide direct proof that she was present at the crime scene after the abduction or had contact with Aldos and Efren. As a result, she was found guilty on a single charge: conspiracy to commit kidnapping. By the time the sentence was handed down, Althea had already served over 12 years in detention. The court ruled that her sentence was fully served and ordered her immediate release. In addition, she was fined 100,000 pesos. The court did not formally acknowledge Althea's role in initiating the plan, despite evidence showing she had suggested the idea of teaching a lesson, arranged the meeting, passed information to Jaro, and led Julie to the location where she was taken. The court's decision sparked a strong emotional response from the Rodelis family. Julie's mother, Luz, along with several of her siblings, attended the sentencing hearing. One of her brothers, Alvin, publicly stated that forgiveness was not possible. The family filed an appeal with the Supreme Court, pushing for a reassessment of Althea's actions. In their view, her role in the events was not secondary, it was central. She initiated the conflict, pulled Jaro into the situation, and had a personal motive driving her choices. Beyond the legal arguments, the case also raised unresolved ethical questions. Althea's exact motive was never fully established. Prosecutors presented two main theories. The first suggested professional jealousy. In a highly competitive modeling world, the leak of any personal information could be damaging to a career, especially in an industry built on image and perception. The second theory was rooted in personal resentment and a desire for revenge. Julie had, without question, achieved more. She was being invited to more high-profile shoots and was rising in popularity. That shift disrupted the balance in their relationship. Althea no longer had control, and based on their message exchanges, she had come to view Julie more as a rival than a friend. That shift, and the perceived loss of status, may have been deeply humiliating for her. The most critical question, one that still hangs over the case, is whether Althea could have foreseen what would happen. Technically, the answer under the law was no, but the sequence of events tells a different story. Althea knew the type of people she was involving. She knew her partner had a history of aggressive behavior. She played an active role in setting the events in motion, then allowed control to shift into the hands of individuals who had shown a willingness to use force. The court's refusal to recognize this as a contributing factor in the crime left the Rodelis family feeling betrayed by the justice system. The conclusion of the trial was far from the end of the story. Two key individuals involved in carrying out the crime remain at large. The Rodelis family continues to push for a full review of the case. Julie's mother declared that she would keep fighting for justice and called Althea's release an insult to my daughter's memory. The question of guilt has been answered, but now the real question is whether that guilt will ever be fully punished. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.